Hey guys, and welcome to another very exciting visual effects tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you... I think we're encountering some sort of technical difficulties. Hang on for a second, I'm just going to get... Well, alright then. Change of plans. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take this friendly clip of Celina, already dressed as a pretty creepy Samara Morgan from the horror classic The Ring, and turn it into this scary shot. In this tutorial, I will cover motion tracking a flickering TV screen into the background just behind Celina, replacing her eyes with all sorts of glowing evil, as well as adding a vignette and some color grading for taste. This is going to be an intermediate tutorial, and besides all of the basic stuff, you should certainly be familiar with time remapping as well as 2D motion tracking. But now, before we run into another bout of technical difficulties, let's jump right into the tutorial. Here we are in Adobe After Effects, and as always I am going to start out with an empty composition. Let's start by dragging the first clip Celina had turned into the composition. If we play this clip back, you may notice that this is actually a clip of Celina lowering her head and the camera moving away from her. The reason why we have actually filmed this clip in reverse is A, to make it easier to focus on Celina's face and get the composition right in the final shot, but also by playing the clip back in reverse, it gives that extra creepy vibe. So the very first thing I want to do, I want to reverse the speed of this clip, so let's apply a time remapping effect. Right click on the layer, go to time, and then simply select Enable Time Remapping. You will see two keyframes on this effect, one for the start and one for the end of the clip, so let's simply reverse these two. This has now reversed the clip and the camera is focusing right on Celina's face just as her head comes up. I am going to tweak the time of this clip just a little bit more. For one, I do want the camera to move in a little bit faster on Celina, so let's create another keyframe here just when the camera reaches Celina. Let's place another keyframe, select that keyframe and the last keyframe so we're not stretching the end of this clip, and pull them forward a little bit so we're just speeding up this little section here of the camera moving in. Then this one here is okay, just a little bit of a pause. But then I think I do want Celina's head to come up a little bit faster, so let's place two keyframes, one at the beginning just before her head comes up. Move forward, once her head is up, place another keyframe, and again, let's select all of the remaining keyframes and drag them in a little bit to compress this time where Celina's head comes up, just so it snaps up a little bit quicker and it's just a little bit more creepy. After the last keyframe of the time remapping effect, obviously After Effects is just going to hold the last frame of this clip, so let's go back to the last keyframe and trim down the clip so it ends exactly when the time remapping effect ends. Let's go back to the beginning and play this clip back one more time. That looks much better already, but I do find that the pause before Celina lifts up her head is a little bit too long, so let's compress this section here just a little bit more. And again, let's trim down this clip to end on the last keyframe. Yep, cool, that looks nice and creepy, and then obviously as Celina opens her eyes we are going to replace them with something nice and evil and glowing. But before we get to that, there is one other thing we need to fix up. In the background behind Celina, you can see the frame of the TV that she climbed out of. However, there is no screen. You can obviously see the wall through the TV, which is going to break the illusion a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do before we get to the eye replacement is we're going to place a screen inside that TV. Obviously, in order to place a screen in that TV, we need to motion track the scene. However, because the background is really blurry and we've got Celina in the foreground, you can't really use the 3D camera tracker and hope that you come up with anything useful at all. In this particular scenario, I'm actually going to use the 2D camera tracker to track the movement of the corner of the TV and something over here on the left side in the background, probably the fan in the background, probably the corner here, just to get a little bit of a track of the movement in the background so that we can place the screen nicely on the TV. To do that, go over into the window menu and bring up the tracker controls. Now, we cannot use the tracker on this clip as it is because the clip has a time remapping effect applied to it. In Adobe After Effects, you cannot motion track any clip that has an effect that modifies the timing of the layer applied to it. But not to worry, simply select the clip and let's pre-compose it by pressing Ctrl-Shift-C, and let's call this one Celina Head Turn Comp. Make sure you select to move all attributes into the new composition, which will then nest the time remap effect inside this new composition, and hit OK. With the timeline indicator still in the same location, which marks the end of this clip, let's actually trim this layer down just so we know exactly where it ends. And now, because all of this is pre-composed, we can easily motion track it. So let's go back to the beginning of this clip, select track motion, and we're going to have a first track point, but because we also want to track the rotation of the camera because it's a handheld shot, let's also select to track rotation. So now we have 2 track points. I am going to place the first one over here on the corner of the TV. And I am going to select the second one, scale this up a little bit and place it right on the corner of the fan. Now this is not at all a perfect shot for motion tracking because the elements we are tracking are rather blurry and out of focus. Because the viewer's attention is mainly going to be on Celina and on her face, what's in the background is not that important, so it's not a big deal that this isn't going to be perfect. Let's make sure we can actually see all of the tracker controls, and let's start by analyzing forward frame by frame. Yep, I think that looks alright. The track points seem to be following the features that I've set them at correctly. So let's be a little bit bolder and analyze forward automatically. Cool, let's scrub through our clip and have a look. I think we're alright with that. Let's create a new null object so we can apply our tracking data to it. Simply right click, go new null object. Let's call this one screen tracker null, and with our tracker still selected, hit edit target, make sure it's set to the screen tracker null. And then let's hit apply. Yep, apply dimensions X and Y is correct, and go OK. Because we've tracked both the position and the rotation, both the position and the rotation property of our null object have now been animated, and there's plenty of keyframes to keep it in line. And so we've got the null object placed on the corner of the TV here, right where we want the screen to be positioned. Let's collapse this layer again, and let's drag the actual layer for the screen into the composition, and that one is called 000 - out of the well. So let's drag this into the composition at the very top. Now this is a little bit too big, so let's scale it down and let's position it over the TV screen. Probably going to have to rotate it a little bit as well to make it fit in. Yep, that I think looks okay. Now let's parent it to the screen tracker null object, and let's disable the visibility of the null object as well, because we don't really need to see it. Let's play this composition back. Yep, that actually looks alright. Now, yes, obviously, if you scrub through and you look really closely, you can see that the screen moves just a little bit, which is due to the fact that the background is really blurry when we tracked it, and so the trackers do drift off a little bit, but it's not going to be that big a deal. Now let's blur out the screen layer to fit in with the background, so simply select the out of the well layer, and let's search for the fast blur effect. Apply the effect to the screen layer, and let's jack up the blurriness to maybe around 100. This will make the layer fit a whole lot better into the background, and the little bit of drifting is hardly noticeable anymore. Now let's address the most obvious issue, that is that the screen is on top of Celina and not behind her as it should be. There are a number of ways to address this problem, but the biggest challenge to achieve this is actually going to be at the edge of where Celina overlaps the screen in the background. If we zoom in here, you can see that there's a lot of detail in Celina's hair that should be lying on top of the screen that we're trying to place in the background, and that is going to be pretty challenging. What I am going to do is I am going to create a new layer that only contains the areas of Celina where she's overlapping the screen, and I am going to place them on top of my composition so that they cover up the screen in the background. For that, select the Celina head turn comp layer and duplicate it with Ctrl D. Let's drag this one to the very top of the composition, and now obviously the screen is no longer visible. Let's go to the beginning. I'm going to use the Roto Brush tool in combination with the Refine Edge tool to solve this problem. Now obviously there's other ways to address it, but personally I think the Roto Brush tool is probably your best bet in being fairly easy and giving you a good result. So let's select the Roto Brush tool and double click on the Celina head turn comp layer to start applying it. One important thing before you start drawing onto this, make sure that under View, under your resolution, you're set to full. If you draw the Roto Brush tool on at half resolution and then you render out your composition in full resolution, the two things are going to be fully out of whack and it's not going to align at all. So make sure you're at full resolution before you start drawing with the Roto Brush tool. Now let me make this a little bit bigger, and let's start drawing over Celina, mainly over the areas where we know she's going to start overlapping on the screen. That's alright, let's move forward a frame, and whenever you can see it snap, you may have to redraw it on. You want to make sure that you do this as precisely as you can. Sometimes you may have to go back and forward a few frames just to make sure that the Roto Brush follows the border of Celina correctly. People always assume there's this one magic button that you click and it'll just do it all automatically. No, visual effects is actually a lot of frame by frame manual work. Obviously the rotor brush tool makes this quite a lot easier, but it's still fairly tedious if you have a long sequence that you're trying to properly rotoscope. Once Celina is properly turned, this gets a whole lot easier because there's no more hair behind her back falling over, and it's just her shoulder and her neck, and that's actually fairly easy to rotoscope out. So let's just go through this. Make sure that obviously any part of her that would be in front of the TV screen is rotoscoped. And here you can see there's a lot of detail in Celina's hair that is going to be pretty hard to rotoscope out. So we are going to fix it up with the Refine Edge tool in a minute. Now, I know I'm not doing the best job in the world, so do feel free to spend hours and hours on end on this to get this as precise as you can. Once you're done applying the rotor brush tool, let's go back to the composition, and you can see that Celina's hair is now properly covering up the screen that we've placed in the background. However, obviously, because Celina's hair contained a lot of detail, we have a really rough and ugly edge here hanging over the screen. One way to make this look a whole lot better is to use the Refine Edge tool. The Refine Edge tool actually works pretty much the same way as the rotor brush tool, except that you usually just use it to clean up edges where you've got a lot of detail in that you want to retain. In order to use the Refine Edge tool, let's go back to the beginning of our composition, and underneath the rotor brush tool, you should find the Refine Edge tool. In order to apply it, simply double click on the Celina head turn comp layer that already has the rotor brush applied to it. As you can see, I have a little brush here, this time it's blue, and to make this a little bit bigger, let's quickly go to Window and enable the Brushes tab, and in the brushes let's select one that's a little bit bigger, maybe 100 pixels. Now, the way the Refine Edge tool works, you actually apply it after you've already applied the rotor brush, and you draw along the edges of the rotor brush to define which edges you want to retain the detail in. So let's apply it here, right on Celina's shoulder, just where she's overlapping the screen in the background. And what this does, if we zoom in a little bit, the Refine Edge tool will actually generate a grayscale matte that tries to detect edges and retain the detail along the edges of your rotor brush tool. Just like with the rotor brush, we can now step through this frame by frame, and we can see what detail is going to be retained. So as you can see, this softened out the edge a little bit. This is going to be a lot more obvious once the hair comes into play. So let's just keep going forward. And just like with the rotor brush tool, you do want to apply it anywhere where you see detail along the edge of your rotor brush. It may not work perfectly, especially here where the background is pretty blurred. It's probably not going to be the best result ever, but it's going to be better than just having the raw rotor brush edge. Yeah, see, there you can see a whole lot of detail coming in with the hair. You can see it's going to get a little bit noisy. There's going to be a little bit of the screen showing through in the end. It's not perfect, but you know, it'll do for now. Yep, I think that's all right. I don't want to spend too much time on this, so let's go back to our composition. And as you can see, Celina is overlapping the screen, but it is a lot more detailed. There's a lot more of her hair retained. It's gotten a little bit blurry and a little bit blotched together with the screen in the background, but it is a big improvement over just having the raw edge of the rotor brush tool. Let's zoom back out, go back to the beginning of our composition and play this whole thing back. Bam! That looks pretty good, I'd say. The screen is now properly placed in the scene just behind Celina. Now, one thing to note is that the rotor brush tool and the Refine Edge tool are pretty heavy effects. They're pretty slow to render out. So one thing I personally like to do when I'm working with the rotor brush tool is to actually render out these rotor layers separately and then import them back into my composition so I can disable the ones that have the actual effects on them, the ones that are really slow to render. Let me quickly rename this layer to Celina Head Roto, and let's solo it because we only want to render out this single layer. Now this actually looks pretty ugly, but that is also because we've kind of extracted it out of the actual scene. The most important thing is that it is on a transparent background, so we can use this as an overlay, as a rotor layer on top of everything else to cover out the screen in the background. So let's add this to the render queue. And you will have to set the output module to a format that has an alpha channel. Personally, I like to use these settings here, which I've set up. And what it is, I've got my format set to QuickTime. Under the format options, I've set my video codec to PNG, and I've set my basic video quality to 100% because I don't want to lose any quality, because this is really just an intermediate render. I don't want to start losing quality halfway through my process. And then in my video output, under the channels, make sure you select RGB and alpha. Otherwise, you are not going to have any transparency and you won't be able to use it as a rotor brush layer. Hit OK. Let's specify an output location. This seems fine. Let's call it Celina Head Roto. Hit save, and let's render out this layer. Sweet, that's done. Let's return to our project and to our composition. Let's unsolo the Celina head roto layer and, well, let's also disable the visibility because we will no longer need it. Instead, let's replace it with the layer we've just rendered out. Double click in the project window and let's locate the clip. It's this one right here, Celina head roto, and let's import this one into our project. Finally, drag the Celina head roto layer into your composition and place it at the very top. Bam! And the screen is behind Celina again. Now, it might feel like this didn't really win us anything, but we have actually replaced this layer here, which contains the roto brush effect, which, as I mentioned, is really slow to render, with a pre-rendered version of the same layer. This will make the rendering inside of Adobe After Effects a whole lot faster and therefore speed up our workflow when we get to the eye replacements and all the other effects that we're going to add. Let's play this composition back one more time to make sure we know exactly where we're at. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the end of these clips and trim them all down to end at exactly the same point in time so there's no weird screen floating in midair. Now let's move on to replace Celina's eyes with something really nice and scary. If we zoom in on this shot, you can tell Celina is actually already wearing whitish contact lenses. While this is already doing a pretty good job of making her look pretty demonic, it just didn't stand out enough in this shot for me. I wanted to have something really evil and glowing and staring into the camera really intensely. Even though her eyes in this shot are only visible for a short period of time, less than a second, I am going to motion track both eyes to replace them properly. To do that, I am actually going to motion track the highlights in her eyes, the reflection of the light, because that is the most distinct part of her eye and that's the easiest to track. So let's go back to where she just opened her eyes and the little highlights are clearly visible, and let's create two new null objects, one for her left eye and one for her right eye. Right click in the layer window and create a new null object. Let's call this one shot 1 left eye and repeat the same process to create another null object, and let's call this one shot 1 right eye. Again, I'm going to trim down both of these layers to end exactly where all the other layers end to keep it nice and clear, and let's start motion tracking eye number 1. So let's select the base footage, the Celina head turn comp, and again, let's select track motion. Let's zoom in until we get onto her eye, and let's place the track point right on top of the eyelid of her eyeball. Right in the center there. The search radius can be a little bit smaller. And let's first track backwards for the last few frames where she's just about to close her eyes. So let's analyze backwards, frame by frame. Yep, and that's probably where the tracker's off anyways. Move forward a little bit, we don't want to retrack that. And then from this point onwards, let's track forward a little bit. I always like to go frame by frame for a little while, just to make sure that the track point stays on target. Given that there's only a couple of frames, we can probably wander all the way through. Yep, and we're done. Select edit target. And obviously this is Celina's left eye. So let's select shot 1 left eye null object to apply the tracker to. Hit OK, and let's hit apply. Go OK. And now we have the shot 1 left eye null object attached to the highlight in Celina's left eye. Let's repeat the same process for the other eye. Let's go back to where Celina's eye just opens. Let's collapse this layer again. Make sure you've got Celina head turn comp selected. And again, let's select track motion. This track point I am now going to place on the highlight for the right eye. Same thing. Let's select the highlight, track point, and let's just start tracking forward a little bit. Just make sure the tracker follows the highlight in Celina's eyes precisely. Maybe we'll adjust the area of interest just a little bit. Let's just go through and make sure they're all properly lined up. Yep, that looks good. And again, let's go edit target. This time we are going to select Celina's right eye, shot 1 right eye, hit OK, and apply the tracking data to the null object. So now we are going to have two null objects that follow the highlight in Celina's eyes. Let's collapse this layer again. Now we're finally ready to replace the eyes. I have a shot here, or an image, I should say, called Tobias' eyeball. Now this does actually look a little bit creepy, but hey, you're watching this tutorial which is all about creepy stuff, so I imagine you're okay with it. I've actually created this image inside of Adobe Photoshop because I can't physically turn my eye 180 degrees around. Some people can. Creepy, I know. I can't, so I've used Photoshop. This image was actually put together from a number of images where I'm looking up and down and left and right, and I've just used Photoshop to replicate the white parts all the way across my eyeball to give this really nice creepy image. Let's scale this layer down and start positioning it on top of Celina's left eye. In order to make the positioning a bit easier, I like to lower the opacity of this image a bit, just so I can see through it. Let's scale it down a little bit more and place it right over the eyeball. Yep, I think about here should be all right. And now let's check up the opacity again. Let's disable the visibility on this layer. But with the layer still selected, let's select the pen tool and let's draw a mask around the area where we want the white eyeball to show. So let's start drawing around Celina's eyeball, all the parts that we want to replace. I actually like her hair hanging over the eye here. Let's keep that in place. Yep, and let's enable the visibility. And the eye is replaced. Yes, it doesn't look that great yet, so let's do a little bit of tweaking. Let's expand the masks and let's increase the mask feather to maybe 20 to 30 pixels. Let's also bring in the mask expansion a little bit, just so it's a little bit darker around Celina's eye. Yep, that's a little bit better, but I do find that her eyeball is a little bit oddly shaped. Let's zoom in a little bit and let's adjust this mask. Let's smoothen out the edges a little bit, just to make it seem a little bit more natural. Yep, I think this should be alright. Let's zoom back out. Yep, much better. Looks a lot more natural. Yes, it still stands out a little bit too much, but we'll worry about that in a minute. Next, select the Tobias eyeball layer and parent it to Celina's left eye null object, which is this null object here, so that the eye will follow the movement of the null object, which is tracked to her eyeball. I'm also going to disable the visibility of these two null objects because they are kind of in the way of us seeing what it would actually look like. And so now if we scrub through this, you can see Celina's eyeball is following her nicely. Now, if you go back even further, the problem is that the eyeball is still visible even when Celina's head is tilted downwards and you can't actually see her eye. So for that, let's disable the visibility on the Tobias eyeball layer. Let's go forward to where we can actually see her eye. And let's animate the mask path. We want the mask to obviously always fit on Celina's eyeball as she's opening her eyes. So let's adjust the mask shape a little bit. And if you go back another frame, yep, in this one, Celina doesn't even have her eyes open anymore, so we can actually trim down this layer to start, yep, one frame further forward, just at the moment when Celina is opening her eyes. Yep, that looks alright. Let's zoom out a little bit and play this back. Cool, I think we're pretty good. Finally, one thing I like to do, I like to add a little bit of glow to the eyeball, just to make it sit a little bit better in Celina's face. Right now it still looks like it's a bit stuck on top of Celina's face, and we also need to adjust the color a little bit. So let's select the Celina eyeball layer, go over into our effects and presets panel, and let's search for the curves effect first. I am going to push a little bit of red into this layer, just a smidge, so it looks a little bit more natural in Celina's eye. Maybe a little bit of blue as well, because otherwise the color is just so off that it doesn't really look like it belongs in Celina's face. I think that looks a little bit better. And finally, let's search for and apply a glow effect to the eyeball. Let's increase the glow threshold because I really only want some parts of Celina's eyeball to glow. And let's also jack up the glow radius because I want the glow to be fairly soft and kind of spread out a little bit across her eye to blend the eyeball we've used as a replacement into her face a little bit better. Finally, let's also bring down the glow intensity to maybe 0.6 or something. I don't want it to be too strong. I just want a little bit of a glow. Yep, that looks alright. I do find that the edge of the mask for her eyeball is a little bit too harsh, looks a little bit unnatural. So maybe let's expand the mask properties again and let's increase the mask feather to maybe almost 60, 70, just to be nice and soft. And let's bring in the mask expansion to kind of, bring in the eyeball a little bit more, make it sit a little bit better in her face. That's much better. I'm pretty happy with this effect. Finally, like with all layers, let's trim this layer down to finish where all of the other layers end. And the first eyeball is officially replaced. Now, looking at this, I do like that it looks nice and evil, but I find that Celina's eye is a little bit too flat. It's missing a little bit of the shape of an eyeball. Let's zoom in a little bit. You can see there's no gradient here, it's just a little bit too flat for my liking. To fix this up, let's for now disable and collapse the glow effect on the Tobias eyeball layer, and then search for and apply a 4-color gradient effect to this layer. Let's actually pull it before the glow. Now this looks a little bit funky, not quite what we want just yet. What we want to do is we want to place point 1 right in the center of the eyeball where we want the highlight to be, and let's change its color to white. Then change the color of all of the other 3 points to black and move them around the center point to create a nice gradient so there's a bit of a highlight in the center of the eye, right in the middle of the eyeball. Yep, that looks alright. And let's change the blend mode over to hard light. What this is going to do is just going to add a little bit of a gradient to this eyeball so it has a little bit more shape. And if you zoom out and actually look at the difference here, this is with the 4-color gradient and that is without. This is a bit flat and this looks much more like an eyeball. Let's zoom back in. Finally, let's also re-enable the glow effect and let me intensify this a little bit. I think I'm going to bring down the glow threshold and maybe bring in the radius a little bit. Tweak this to your liking. I just want, a little bit of glow around the eyeball to intensify the stare. Let's zoom back out. Yeah, maybe a little bit more tweaking, but I think this actually looks pretty good. I think the glow effect does a nice job of just adding a little bit of intensity to that eye. And as you may have noticed, the 4-color gradient really does a nice job of adding a lot of shape back into the eye. It just looks a lot more suitable. It fits a lot better into the shot. Let's rename this layer to shot 1 left eyeball. And because we still need to cover up Celina's right eye, let's duplicate this layer and let's call this copy shot 1 right eyeball. Let's zoom back in and let's reposition this layer on Celina's right eye as best as we can. Let's disable the visibility for now and let's simply take the mask that is already on this layer and reshape it to fit around Celina's right pupil. This is where we want the highlight to be. Let's go down to the 4-color gradient and make sure point 1 is actually in the center of the eyeball. I think I'm also going to bring in the other 3 a little bit just to add a little bit more shape to this one. Feel free to tweak this to your liking, obviously. Finally, because we have a separate null object to track the right eye of Celina, make sure that you parent the right eyeball layer to the right eye null object. So your left eyeball layer should be parented to the left eye null object and your right eyeball layer should be parented to the right eye null object. Finally, reveal all of the keyframes on this layer by pressing U. You are going to see the keyframes for the mask path property, but we have animated this matching Celina's left eye. So we can't actually use them, so delete all of the keyframes except for the one at the current location. So let's go backwards a little bit to where Celina's closing her eye, which is happening right here. Let's disable the visibility, but with the layer still selected. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's adjust the mask accordingly, just to follow Celina's eye a little bit cleaner. And as she's closing her eye, right here is where the layer ends. So let's end the layer so it opens up here. Make sure the mask reshapes properly to fit around Celina's eye as it opens up. And then because it's already tracked to the null object that follows the eye, I think the rest should be alright. Re-enable the visibility on the right eyeball. Zoom all the way out. And let's play this back. Now, if that's not an unfriendly face, I don't know what is. This looks really nice and evil. Finally, there are 2 more things that we are going to add as part of this tutorial. Firstly, we are going to add a vignette just to focus the viewer's attention in on Celina's face. And secondly, we are going to add some color correction and color grading to intensify the overall effect. To create a vignette, simply go into your layer window, right click and create a new solid. Make sure the color of the solid is black and let's call this one vignette. Hit OK, it will automatically sit at the top of your composition anyways. Then select the ellipse mask tool and create a mask right in the center of your composition. You can hold down Ctrl to center this mask. Obviously this mask is an additive mask, so we've just blocked out Celina, but simply go down into your mask properties and change the mask over to subtract. We now have some really nice dark corners on the left and right side of this shot, but it's a bit too harsh, so let's expand the mask and increase the mask feather to something pretty big, maybe 500-600. We want the vignette to be nice and soft. That is doing a great job of focusing the viewer's attention right on Celina's face and right on those eyes staring at you. Let's collapse the vignette layer and again trim it down to end when all the other layers are ending. And finally, as the cherry on the cake, let's add some color correction and color grading. For that, create a new adjustment layer. Let's call this layer Color Fixes and Grading. And let's search for and apply a curves effect to this layer. I am going to bring down the overall brightness by quite a bit just to make it a little bit more sinister. And I'm going to add a little bit more contrast just to make Celina's face and the eyes pop out a little bit stronger. Yep, that looks alright. Now let's go over into the red channel and let's drain some of the red out of the image just so it goes nice and green, bluish, just nice and cold. Now let's hop over into the blue channel and push this up a little bit. Obviously, you can tweak this to your liking. You can add all sorts of other color effects. I did want to go for a fairly blue-greenish look, like the girl just came out of that blue-green TV screen and right into your living room. Finally, again, let's trim down the layer to end where all of the other layers are ending. Let's rewind our composition. Let's make this a little bit bigger and let's play back our final effect. And that's all there is to it. Remember, with visual effects, it's all about attention to detail, and very often there just is no one-button solution, and you will have to invest some solid times, sometimes hours, sometimes days or even weeks to get something to look just right. Anyhow, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them down in the section below. If you want to see more cool visual effects and filmmaking tutorials, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I would also greatly appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up, favorite it and share it with the world. If you want to get in contact or simply stay up to date with what is going on, you can also find and follow me on Facebook, Twitter or Google+. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I will see you later.